Okay, our next guest on stage doesn't need any introduction. Dr. Anil Sharma, extremely well known in the region and globally in actual fact. Very good friend of Marine Money also. And Dr. Anil, amongst other things, is going to tell us, as a ship owner, how he assesses the overall risks ahead, and also about the role of sustainable ship recycling in an ESG-focused world. Interviewing Anil, we have Rania Tadros, Managing Partner here in Dubai of Stephenson Harwood. Rania, please.
Thank you. Dr. Sharma doesn't really need an introduction, but given that I'm a lawyer, I did do some research in advance, and you will all know Dr. Sharma as CEO of GMS. But what you might not know is that he's also listed and has been listed for the last 13 years in the Lloyd's List 100 most influential people in shipping. So actually, this is a great honor for us all to have what I think is 1.5 minutes, but I'm afraid I'm going to extend it to my full 20 minutes, to get his views on very important topics in an area that I know he is extremely passionate about. So I'll kick off the questions, I guess, by asking him a question that might be on people's minds. How do you think you can balance being a ship owner on the one hand and being the CEO and founder of the world's largest ship recycling company? Do you feel that there is a conflict in those roles, or can you merge them together?
Thank you, Rania, first of all, for the introduction. I'll be honest, when I first started buying ships in 2006 for trading, I was doing it discreetly because my clients are the ship owners, and I didn't want to see any conflict with the ship owners. It's only in the last, I would say, during pre-COVID times, when the business started growing, we made some substantial investments on trading vessels during COVID times, and those turned out to be good investments. That I realized that what we were doing now is, we're not building new ships. We're not competing with ship owners on modern tonnage. What we are doing, I think you heard Steve saying that we are focusing on mid-aged and vintage assets. And to me, that's a very, I would say, natural growth for us. Instead of being horizontal expansion, we are doing bottom-up expansion, going from ship recycling. So what that means is we understand residual values. That's what we have been doing for 30 years, for 3 decades. So when we buy a 17-year-old vessel, we are trying to see the delta between the trading life of a vessel and what will be the residual value. And it kind of makes sense for us. It's only when the scrap prices go very high, like when they went up to the 670, 680, 700, when we felt it's too risky to buy vintage assets, we started going into more, I would say, modern mid-aged vessels. So I think there's no conflict there. We are, as Steve said, counter-cyclical. We are not buying when others are buying. So I think the owners actually appreciate us being there because there are these relationships. Shipping to me is a small community. And when you build relationships, it's not a transactional relationship for us. It's not we buy one ship and we disappear. We have done more than almost now reaching 5,000 deals. So when you're doing so much business with a ship owner for a period of time, they just welcome the fact that we are there. They understand what we're going to get out of it. So what I felt was going to be a conflict initially, it's actually turned out to be quite the opposite.
So are you feeling that your interaction with the ship owners now extends beyond simply an end-of-cycle conversation? Sorry.
Yeah, it does. It does. Now we can sit on conversation and discuss, vintage assets, regulations. We understand their view, the challenges they face when they want to sell a ship for recycling. It makes us better cash buyers as well, in that sense.
You go on the other side of the line a little bit.
So we hear the questions, the concerns, and that's how we came up with some of the programs with it, because we would come to forums like this and hear the concerns, like decarbonization, right? I mean,
it's the buzzwords. I think we'd all pay a penalty if we didn't say it 10 times in a conference. On identifying risks, I mean, you talk about shipping being a very small community. It is globally a small community, and locally an even smaller community. But what are the risks that you see in ship recycling in particular? What particular risks, is there anything that keeps you awake at night, or generally what are the risks you see?
Well, to me, is the prices that keep me awake, the volatility in the prices. This you can see a 10% movement in price in a week, which is unprecedented. We heard somebody else saying there was a little sustainability in the business model. There isn't that. I mean, we can go up and down. So from that side is this. But the risks are, to me, has always been, for a long time, is the whole perception about the ship recycling. Ship recycling, in essence, I come from an academic background. It's a very green industry. It's a very sustainable industry. But if you go into a shipping conference or something, the ship recycling is always considered as a very negative thing. It doesn't enjoy a good reputation. And what that translates is into almost regulation that is now developed by, especially in our case, Europe. That is not sensible regulation. I mean, it has become regulation which doesn't provide, it raises more questions, more problems, does not provide any solutions. The good thing was the IMO did a fantastic job with coming with the Hong Kong Convention. We played a big role in that. There are about 100 yards in India that are certified by, that meet the Hong Kong Convention guidelines. And they're certified by the class societies, so all the major class societies, class NK, LR, BV, RENA, IRS. But you still can't go over that hump, that ship recycling is green. I mean, there are still, especially ship owners in Europe, that are petrified when they have a ship to recycle. They're just worried about this headline risk. And so these risks mean they start doing things that actually become worse. Instead of solving a problem, they're creating a bigger problem. I don't know how many of you read in the local newspapers, there was this ad of an aircraft carrier, Sao Paulo, that the Brazilian Navy had to sink. And this vessel went through a very detailed auction process in Brazil. And Brazilian Navy said it has to be recycled in EU-approved yards. All right, so there are some yards in Turkey that are approved by EU. And this Turkish cash buyer bought the vessel, took her all across the ocean, towed her into the Mediterranean. And in the meantime, the NGO said, wait a minute, there was a hazardous inventory of hazardous materials created by Krieg Green. And they said, this does not truly represent what's on board. There's more asbestos on board. So they put a lot of pressure on the Turkish government to reverse the approval. Approvals were already given by the Brazilian government, by the Turkish government. And the Turkish government retracted the approval. And the vessel had to wait off Gibraltar for weeks, probably months. And finally, the Brazilian government asked them to bring the aircraft carrier back. So she went all the way for months from Brazil to Gibraltar, came back all the way, and when she came back, it started leaking. And then the final decision was made, just sink it. And so this one had all this asbestos on board, and now it's resting on the bottom of an ocean floor in the Atlantic. Is it really good? 6 months of going across the world, coming back. So I think the risks are terrible. This poor cash buyer have lost millions. He paid cash for this. And so this regulation, which is driven by just these highlights without people truly understanding the issues, because it would have been far more superior for this ship to have been recycled sensibly in Turkey, and they can do it.
But even trade winds, when they reported on the ship, haven't focused so much on the alternative story or the option that could have been, but they are focused on the fact that there has been a scuttling of an aircraft carrier with asbestos on board, big headline. So shipping seems to be, even when you can see certainly the regulation having a negative impact or a potentially negative impact, the shipping world or the press can't see it. And why is it that they want to or choose to or have a vested interest in maintaining a negative impact of ship recycling? I mean, we all have images of beached vessels and, people with inadequate protection tearing them apart effectively. Why is it that is the image that shipping wants to portray on effectively recycling rather than scuttling?
It's a great question, Rania. I mean, let's start with the history. I mean, there is truth to that. I mean, the ship recycling in the Indian subcontinent didn't come up by design, it came up by accident. I mean, suddenly there was a ship that was beached during a storm in Bangladesh, and they started saying, okay, let's start recycling it. And so there was no real proper, like shipyards do, planning that was involved. And the local business people just started finding ways to recycle. And there was that big story in the Baltimore Sun that got a Pulitzer Award and all that stuff. So, I mean, there was a lot of good sensible press at that time that highlighted the issue. But the pictures that came out of that were just so powerful that people in my generation who saw these pictures, they can't come across over this hump that actually the recycling has changed. So I think the first thing to answer that is, am I to blame? Probably I do. I mean, we need to do a better job to communicate, to tell our story. And that's one of the reasons when I do the Marine Monies of this world, to talk about this industry. And not too many people want to hear me speak, but I think it's if we build that communication with the ship owners, with the capital providers, it makes sense for all of us. Because if we don't, then certain misinformation is going to be out there, and people are going to. Recently, a Taiwanese container owner did that. He wanted to sell 10 container ships, then got so much pressure from his capital providers not to go to India, and they couldn't find an option. So they finally said, okay, 3 to you, GMS, you take these 3 ships to India because we know you're going to do it right. But 5 we're going to sell to Indonesia, which is not really a big ship recycling country, and we are willing to take 60-80% less price. And then we'll give one to Bahrain and to see if Bahrain can also recycle. So I'm not saying this is necessarily a wrong thing. If you are a company that is willing to take that to talk about residual values, my job always is to the capital providers and the ship owners is to provide the best value. If you want sustainable green recycling, India has 100 yards. 3 are now in Bangladesh, so there are 103 yards that you have, and there are in Turkey, so 110 yards. I don't care. We used to do a lot of Hapag-Lloyd business, and one day Hapag-Lloyd said, you are our biggest customer. And I realized I never sold a single ship into the Indian subcontinent, but those days I was selling all the ships to China and Turkey, so we can do that.
So there's a historical image issue that's not necessarily being remedied or being reflective of the mitigating aspects you are taking to make ship recycling safer, or things like the Hong Kong Convention, to ensure that there are protocols in place. But many of us are still left with old images, if you like, of what the ship recycling processes are. So what can we do aside from communication and education, I guess, to get over that hump? I mean, are there any other steps that can be taken?
No, absolutely, because when I speak about it, there's a credibility issue. I mean, right? People will say, he's going to say, because that's what the industry is in. So, I mean, if say, BIMCO would say about this, Intertanko would say about this, there's some credibility as well.
Some lobbying.
So with lobbying, we don't have any trade association, by the way. There is no ship recycling association in this world that represents ship recycling in global forums. And so you need somebody to take the ball and run with it. And I think it's great if we can have more, building. And I think that's what the trade win story you said. We have a CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer, and that's what he was saying, that we need to build bridges. We need to work together with the NGOs, with the capital providers, with the regulators, to open this dialogue.
Yes, to avoid a worse outcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's just think about a situation which is probably not a very mature response to what we could do, but is consistent with the way my 13-year-old treats me, which is to say, right, I don't want to play anymore. The Indian subcontinent is not going to recycle. What's going to happen to the market if we say, right, you don't like us, we're the bad guys, we're not going to play anymore?
Oh, wow. I mean, all the bankers and capital providers, you better close your ears because you don't want to know the answer, because suddenly, you see, I don't know how many of you think like that. So say, for example, I mean, I don't know what the new building price of a VLCC today is. I would assume 100 million. But let's say if it was an $80 million vessel, and the residual value of a VLCC is about 20 million, right? So you have 60 million that you need to earn, say, over a 20-year period. So that means you need to make, I'm talking simple math, $3 million a year, and okay, you make your 60 million, at least you're breaking even, right? And now, if there is no residual value, it's zero. And so now you have to make $4 million a year in your freight, so that's about a 33%, 30+% increase in a charter rate. Now that's great when to today's market, you probably can recover it in very half that time, but okay, the pain that all these VLCC owners have gone through over a period of time has been great. So what does that mean to the financing, to new building prices? What happens to the environment?
Yeah.
You know, what is the next best case? Are we talking about paying for it? Are we, of course, we're not going to scuttle, but okay, what are the options? I don't think there's enough capacity. EU ship recycling regulation, when they say Hong Kong Convention doesn't go far enough,
Yeah.
they realize there's no capacity. Even the 7-8 yards in Turkey that do that, they can't recycle the big ships. So we're
So
going
it's
to do that.
not just a case of effectively the ships going further west and finding a home to be recycled. There is going to be a serious capacity issue. So there's a direct financial issue and a practical issue as well.
And the environmental issue as well. Because let's go now top down. When a recycler recycles a vessel, what happens to the steel? Right? And so when you go to these Western countries, the steel has to be again exported back, right? Into because the steel that comes out of a ship, the key to remember is that in the Indian subcontinent, the steel that comes from a ship goes straight from the shipyard to a rolling mill. It doesn't go into a furnace. Whereas if you recycle these vessels in the Western world, it would go into a furnace. So that also increases one extra layer of cost. And if you're talking about carbon intensity, again, going melting this and then turning into it. So the scrap part is fine. So you don't have enough downstream value for this. The motors, the pumps, the non-ferrous items, these countries recycle 97% of the vessel. You cannot recycle 97% of a ship in Europe. It would be more 50 to 60%. So that's also an environmental issue as well.
Yeah, yeah. So can you tell us a little bit more about what GMS in particular is doing to make recycling more sustainable and to make it sort of fit into the ESG model that all corporates are required to fit into?
Well, again, I said earlier, I came from an academic world, and I have a very kind of a bottom line, common sense way of looking at things. And before ESG, in fact, I remember listening to ESG for the first time in New York. I think it was a Marine Money conference, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting term. That was about, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, or something like that. Before that, it was CSR, right? I mean, back about almost 2 decades ago, there was a Dutch ship owner who said, I want to recycle my vessel, and I'm worried about all these things that I see in the papers. Can you figure out a way how I can recycle my ships responsibly? That was the term. And I said, great, let me figure it out. So I was just thinking how I'm going to do it. And at that time, GL was still around and they were doing things. So I spoke with Henning, who's now, I guess he has his own company. And I said, how can we figure it out to do this in a way, in a responsible manner? And you guys do it because I don't have the expertise. And we brainstormed and we came up with a program, how we're going to do it. And I think they charged a lot of money to this owner and the owner was willing to pay, and we did that. And then I thought, that's a great stuff. And so that was almost 20 years ago, we started talking about sustainable, we didn't know the word sustainable, but responsible recycling. So we've been doing this over this period of time. And when the IMO started with the Hong Kong Convention, they invited me to work with them, to guide them. We did site visits. I was traveling with the 17 delegates, visiting all these yards and countries. So I've been involved as GMS very closely with all this regulatory process, because I don't think anybody in this room wants to get up in the morning and saying, I want an unsafe ship. I don't want an unsafe recycling yard. I don't want to pollute the environment. None of us want to do that. It's just we need to balance the economics of it with common sense. And how do we do it? And the process is slow. We are talking about the reputation, right? The recyclers were like, we just don't want to listen to you. You're coming here to destroy our industry. I mean, I remember in one of these Hong Kong IMO meetings, they were just attacking me because their view was that I'm going to shut down the industry. It's a slow process, but we got there. So I think I can't just, it's me, it's the recycling yards, it's the owners who are willing to pay, the Japanese ship owners, the Norwegians.
Your first owner.
Yeah. I put a lot of credit to the Japanese ship owners. They did a great job. They pushed Class NK to come in and certify yards. They wanted green yards. The Norwegians were the first to raise this flag. almost 15 years ago. So I can't take credit for that, but so it's when you come together and identify an issue, I think we can all find a solution. So my job is always to say, if Kevin wants to recycle his ship behind his house somewhere, I'm going to try my best to find a way.
Okay, so since I have 2 minutes, I think it's only fair to allow someone else to ask a question and get the insights of Dr. Sharma.
Do we have a question, please, from the floor? Yes? No? Let me ask a question. Now you've got two hats. You've got a hat as doing recycling, a hat as a ship owner. Do you have any kind of preference, any kind of sort of high points or low points in one or the other or whatever?
Well, when you wear the ship owning hat, the field is much more bigger, right? And one of the things I think when Steve put a slide, which makes it easier, is because we understand residual value, we understand vintage assets. It allows us an opportunity to move around very wide spectrum of assets. Container ships, bulk carriers, gas carriers. So I think it's a much bigger field that you're playing. We like it, and that's why we have Steve, Nitin, these guys who do it. I want to be known as a recycler, and I'm very comfortable with that. That's what.
Anil and Rania, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.